The county clerk looked at my husband across the courtroom table, then looked at me, then looked back at the 312-page binder I'd submitted as Exhibit A, and said, "Sir, are you aware that your wife has documented every single property transaction you've conducted in the last 19 months, including 3 you failed to disclose to the IRS?" Garrison went white. Not pale. White. Like someone had run a shop vac over his circulatory system. His attorney, a guy named Trip Belmont, who charged $475 an hour and had never lost a divorce proceeding in Wake County, set down his pen and stared at the table like it owed him money. And Garrison's mother, Paulette, who had driven 2.5 hours from Wilmington specifically to watch me get destroyed in this hearing, she made this sound, this tiny, wet inhale, like a Pomeranian choking on a grape. That was November 16th, 2022. A Tuesday. 53 degrees outside, overcast. The kind of Raleigh autumn day that smells like wet mulch and regret. But this story doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with a server rack, a bag of Takis, and the worst anniversary dinner of my life. My name is Temperance Yoon. Temperance, like the virtue my mother hoped I'd grow into and absolutely did not. Most people call me Tempe. I was 37 when everything happened, and I'd been a database administrator for the state of North Carolina's Department of Revenue for 11 years. If you don't know what a database administrator does, the short version is, I make sure data doesn't disappear. The long version is, I have access to systems that track every taxable transaction, every property filing, every digital breadcrumb that people think evaporates when they clear their browser history. It doesn't. Nothing digital ever truly disappears. That's the thing people never understand until it's too late. I grew up in a split-level ranch in Garner, just south of Raleigh, the youngest of 3 kids. My older brother Huck went into the Marines at 18 and never really came back. Not physically, I mean emotionally. He lives in Fayetteville now and sells insurance. My sister Lenora is a dental hygienist in Charlotte who sends me TikToks of cats falling off counters at 6 a.m. like it's a public service. Our dad left when I was 9. Just drove to the Food Lion for milk one Saturday in March of 1993 and kept going. My mom, Yolanda, raised us on a receptionist's salary at a podiatry office, which meant we ate a lot of rice and beans and knew the exact date the power bill was due because she'd circle it on the kitchen calendar in red Sharpie like it was a bomb threat. My grandmother, on my mom's side, Halmoni Park, we called her Halmoni, which is just Korean for grandmother, lived with us from the time I was 11 until she passed in 2014. She was 4'11", weighed maybe 98 pounds, and had survived the Korean War, a bad marriage, immigration, and 3 decades of working at a dry cleaner in Durham. She was the toughest person I've ever known, and she had this saying she'd repeat whenever someone in the family was going through something hard. She'd pat your hand and say, "Save the receipt. You will need it later." As a kid, I thought she was being literal. She was always saving receipts. Shoe boxes full of them in her closet. But as I got older, I realized what she actually meant. Document everything. Keep the proof. Because the day will come when your word won't be enough, and the paper will speak for you. I was always good with data, not math specifically. I'm terrible at mental arithmetic, couldn't split a dinner check without a calculator to save my life. But data, patterns, the way information connects across systems. In college at NC State, I majored in information science and spent most of my time in the computer lab eating vending machine peanut butter crackers and writing SQL queries for fun, which tells you everything you need to know about my social life between the ages of 18 and 22. My one indulgence was cooking. Not fancy cooking. I mean, I could make a really excellent budae jjigae, the Korean army stew my halmoni taught me, with spam and ramen noodles and gochujang, and I dreamed of someday opening a tiny restaurant. Just a little lunch counter. 8 seats, a chalkboard menu, nothing fancy. A place where the food tasted like someone's grandmother made it. That dream sat on a shelf for a long time, but I kept it, the way Halmoni kept receipts. I also had this habit, and I know this makes me sound unhinged, but it became relevant, of never deleting emails. Not work emails, not personal emails, not even promotional emails from Bed Bath & Beyond after they'd already gone bankrupt. My inbox at any given time had somewhere north of 40,000 messages, organized into nested folders with color-coded labels. My coworker Femi once saw my email system and said it looked like the inside of a serial killer's mind, but efficient. Fair. The summer I turned 25, I helped my Uncle Cho renovate a rental duplex he'd bought off a tax lien sale in East Raleigh. I learned how property liens work, how title transfers happen, how county records are filed. It was boring as hell at the time. Remember that. It matters later. I met Garrison Whitford at a friend's housewarming party in October of 2011. He was 28, 6'1", sandy brown hair that he wore pushed back like a Kennedy, and he had this laugh that filled a room. Worked in commercial real estate, leasing and property management for a firm called Meridian Partners, which handled strip malls and office parks across the Triangle. He showed up to the party in a navy blazer with no tie and brought a $40 bottle of Malbec, which at that point in my life was the most expensive wine I'd ever seen that wasn't behind glass at a restaurant. He found me in the kitchen, refilling a bowl of hummus because the host had forgotten to put out more pita chips. He said, "You look like the only person here who actually knows where things are." And I said, "That's because I reorganized the pantry 20 minutes ago. It was bothering me." And he laughed, that big, warm laugh, and said, "Marry me." He was kidding, obviously. But he said it again, seriously, 14 months later. The first red flag was at his mother's house in Wilmington, Thanksgiving 2012, 6 weeks after we'd started dating. Paulette Whitford was a retired interior decorator who had opinions about everything and expressed them with the subtlety of a car alarm. When Garrison introduced me, Paulette looked me up and down and said, "Oh, you're so petite. Garrison usually goes for taller women." And Garrison laughed, didn't correct her, just laughed and changed the subject to the sweet potato casserole. I told myself it was nothing. She was just old-fashioned. He was just keeping the peace. Looking back, that dinner should have been a flashing billboard on I-40 that read, "Turn around, temp." But the good times were real, too. That's the part people don't understand when they hear stories like this. The good times aren't fake. That's what makes the bad times survivable for so long. Garrison would leave sticky notes on my steering wheel, little drawings of suns and moons with messages like, "You're my favorite database." He'd drive 40 minutes to this specific taco truck on Capitol Boulevard because I'd mentioned once that their Al Pastor was the best I'd ever had. On our second anniversary, he rented a cabin in Blowing Rock, and we cooked together. I made the budae jjigae. He made this hilariously bad attempt at risotto. And we sat on the porch in November, drinking cheap beer and not talking, which is the most intimate thing two people can do. We got married in April 2014, small ceremony at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, 38 guests. Halmoni was there. She was frail by then, oxygen tank and all, but she held my hand and whispered, "Save the receipt." I laughed. She didn't. She passed 7 months later. Pancreatic cancer. Quick and cruel. Our son Wyatt was born in 2016. Our daughter Juniper, we called her Junie, came in 2018. I went back to work both times within 10 weeks because we needed the income, and because, honestly, the database didn't betray me or spit up on my shoulder. Things started to shift around early 2020, not dramatically, like a house settling. You don't notice it until the door doesn't close right anymore. Garrison started working later. Not unusual for commercial real estate. Deals close at weird hours. But it went from 1 late night a week to 3. His phone, which used to sit face up on the kitchen counter, migrated to his pocket. Always. Even when he was just walking to the bathroom. In May of 2020, he changed his phone passcode. I knew because Wyatt, who was 4, tried to open it to play his dinosaur game, and it didn't work. When I mentioned it, Garrison said, "IT required us to update. New security protocols." He said it casually. Too casually. Like he'd rehearsed it. That June, he bought me a $1,200 Le Creuset Dutch oven. Unprompted. Just came home with it in a Williams-Sonoma bag and set it on the counter like it was a Tuesday. I remember standing in the kitchen holding this beautiful, heavy, flame orange pot and thinking, why? We'd just argued about money 2 days before. I'd suggested we refinance the house to lower our monthly payment, and he'd snapped at me. "You handle your databases. Payment. I'll handle the finances." That was a phrase he'd started using a lot. You handle your databases. Like my job was cute. Like it was a hobby. And then the Dutch oven. Guilt, I now know, is a very specific currency, and it almost always overpays. The fracture came on September 4th, 2020, a Friday. I'd gotten home early from work because the office was doing staggered schedules, pandemic protocols, and I found Garrison's laptop open on the kitchen island. He was in the shower. The screen was on his email. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. I was going to close it. But my eye caught a name in the subject line of a message. Kendra. The email was from Kendra Voss. It said, "Last night was everything. Can't stop thinking about the look on your face. Same time Thursday." I stood there for maybe 15 seconds, maybe an hour. Time does strange things when the floor is dissolving. Then I heard the shower turn off, and I closed the laptop and went outside and sat in the garden and pulled weeds for 45 minutes until my hands were raw. And that was just the beginning. The next 4 months were a masterclass in gaslighting. I confronted Garrison that night after the kids were asleep. Showed him the email on his own laptop. He looked at me with this expression, not guilt, not anger, but this patronizing calm, and said, "Babe, Kendra is a broker at Meridian. That email is about a property showing. Last night was a late showing at a retail space in Cary. The look on your face is an inside joke about how I react to bad floor plans." He said it so smoothly that for about 11 seconds, I believed him. "You're doing that thing again," he said. "That thing where you take normal stuff and twist it into something dark. It's not healthy, Tempe." That thing. He'd been saying that for a year. That thing. Like my pattern recognition, the exact skill that made me exceptional at my job was a personality defect. By October, the disrespect had escalated. At a dinner party hosted by his colleague Barrett and Barrett's wife Sloan, Garrison made a comment about my cooking in front of 6 people. I'd brought my Halmoni's japchae, glass noodles with vegetables, which I spent 2 hours making. Garrison looked at it on the table and said, Tempe's always experimenting on us. Last week she made something with spam. Like, actual spam from a can. Everyone laughed. I didn't. Budai jjigae is a dish born from war and survival, and my grandmother fed it to me with love, and he turned it into a punchline between bites of Sloane's store-bought bruschetta. November brought financial control. I discovered, because I'm a database administrator, and discovering things in financial systems is literally my profession, that Garrison had opened a separate checking account at a different bank. First Citizens, not the Wells Fargo we'd used jointly for 7 years. The account had $23,400 in it. When I asked about it, he said it was a business escrow account for Meridian. Standard practice, he said. You wouldn't understand the real estate side. There was that word again. Understand. Like I was a golden retriever watching someone do calculus. By December, the evidence of Kendra became impossible to ignore. He smelled different on Thursday nights. Not like perfume. That would have been too obvious, and Garrison was nothing if not strategic. He smelled like a different laundry detergent. Gain, the green one, instead of our usual Tide. Which meant he was keeping clothes somewhere else. Which meant this was infrastructure, not impulse. I found a charge on the hidden First Citizens account, $189 per month to a storage unit on Glenwood Avenue. A storage unit. For a man who already had a 3-car garage. The public humiliation hit its peak in January 2021. Garrison's firm threw its annual New Year mixer at the Umstead Hotel in Cary. Open bar, past appetizers, the whole performance. I wore a green dress I'd bought at Nordstrom Rack for $67. I remember the price because I'd agonized over spending it. Garrison looked at me when I came downstairs and said, "That's what you're going with." At the party, I was standing near the bar when I saw her. Kendra Voss. Tall, auburn hair, wearing a black dress that cost more than my monthly car payment. She was laughing with Barrett and 2 other Meridian brokers, and when she saw me, she smiled. Not a polite smile, a knowing one. The kind of smile that says, I have something that's yours, and you can't do anything about it. Garrison spent the entire evening on the opposite side of the room from me. At one point, I watched him lean in and whisper something to Kendra, and she threw her head back and laughed, and he touched the small of her back, the exact spot he used to touch on mine. I drove home alone. He said he had to close out the tab. He got home at 2:14 a.m. I know because I was sitting in the dark kitchen eating leftover japchae straight from the Tupperware with a fork, which is either very sad or very powerful, depending on your perspective. I choose to believe it was powerful. The japchae was excellent. February brought the Ally attack. Paulette came to visit for President's Day weekend, which is not a holiday anyone celebrates with a family visit, unless the visit has an agenda. She waited until Garrison was at the store buying charcoal for the grill, and then sat down across from me at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and delivered what I can only describe as a prepared statement. "Temperance," she said. She always used my full name like it was a court summons. "I think you need to hear something difficult. Garrison isn't happy. He hasn't been happy for a while. And I think a good wife, a strong wife, would recognize that and give him the space to figure out what he needs." I said, "Are you asking me to let your son cheat on me?" She said, "I'm asking you to stop being so controlling. You monitor everything. You track everything. It's suffocating." The irony of being called controlling by a woman who once rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking was not lost on me. But I just nodded and said, "I'll think about that, Paulette." And I did think about it. For about 4 seconds. Then I went back to what I was actually doing, which Paulette and Garrison and Kendra and every single one of his Meridian colleagues had no idea about. But I'll get to that. March 2021. The spatial violation. I came home from work on a Wednesday to find that Garrison had converted my home office, the small bedroom where I kept my personal computer, my Halmoni's recipe box, my books, my framed NC State diploma, into a guest room for when Paulette visited. He'd moved my desk into the garage. My diploma was leaning against a wall behind a stack of moving boxes. Halmoni's recipe box was on top of the dryer. "You never use that room anyway," he said, "and Mom needs a proper space." I stood in the garage looking at my desk, at the recipe box, at 12 years of my professional life shoved next to a lawnmower, and I thought, this is what erasure looks like. Not a single dramatic act. A series of small relocations until there's nowhere left that's yours. April brought the institutional threat. Garrison sat me down after the kids went to sleep and told me, calmly, that he'd spoken to an attorney. "Just to understand our options," he said. But the word options was doing a lot of heavy lifting. He told me that if we separated, he'd seek primary custody of Wyatt and Uni. He said his income was 3 times mine. He said his mother would testify to my erratic behavior and obsessive tendencies. He said, and this is the part that still makes my stomach turn, no judge in Wake County is going to give primary custody to a woman who spends more time with spreadsheets than her own children. He said it leaning against the kitchen counter, eating a banana, like he was discussing the weather. That's the thing about Garrison. He could deliver a death blow between bites of fruit. The man could ruin your life with the same energy he'd use to order a sandwich. But the cruelest moment, the one I still see when I close my eyes, came on May 8th, 2021, the day before Mother's Day. Wyatt, who was 5, came home from kindergarten with a card he'd made. Construction paper, glitter, crayon drawing of our family, me, Garrison, Wyatt, Junie, and what was either a dog or a very large hamster. He was so proud. He handed it to me at the door and said, "Mommy, I drawed our family, but Daddy said we might have a different family soon." What does that mean? 5 years old. Construction paper in his hands. Glitter on his cheek. I knelt down and hugged him and said, "It means Daddy is confused, baby. Our family is right here." That night, after both kids were asleep, I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. Not crying. I was past crying. I was somewhere beyond it. This flat, clear, Arctic place where emotion doesn't reach. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not a dramatic resolution. Not a declaration of war. Just a quiet, mechanical click, like a deadbolt sliding into place. I stood up, washed my face, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. I named it Receipts. Halmoni would have been proud. What nobody knew, not Garrison, not Paulette, not Kendra, not Trip Belmont, or anyone at Meridian Partners, was that I hadn't just been sitting there absorbing punches for the past 8 months. I'd been building a case since the night I found that email. September 4th, 2020. Since the moment I closed his laptop and went outside to pull weeds, my hands weren't shaking from shock. They were shaking because my brain was already running queries. See, here's what Garrison never understood about my job. He thought I sat in a cubicle and stared at numbers. What I actually do is trace financial transactions across interconnected databases. Tax filings, property records, business registrations, bank disclosures. I see how money moves, where it hides, what it says when it thinks nobody's listening. And money always talks. The first thing I did, back in September 2020 was run Garrison's name through the county property records system, not the state system. I'd never use my work access for personal purposes. That's a felony, and I'm not stupid. The county records are public. Anyone can search them from a library computer. But most people don't know how to cross-reference a property index number with a deed transfer, or how to search by grantor instead of address, or how to spot a quitclaim deed that's been filed at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday when the clerk's office is about to close and nobody's paying attention. I found 4 properties. 4. Garrison and I owned our house on Millbrook Road jointly. That I knew. What I didn't know was that Garrison had acquired 3 additional properties through Meridian Partners LLC structure, a condo in North Hills, a duplex near NCSU, and a vacant lot in Apex, all purchased in the last 2 years, all funded through accounts I'd never seen. Total assessed value, $1.14 million. Remember my Uncle Cho's rental duplex? The one I helped renovate when I was 25? I learned how title transfers work. I learned how LLCs can obscure ownership. And I learned that if you file a quitclaim deed transferring marital property into a single-member LLC without your spouse's knowledge or consent, that's not just sneaky. In North Carolina, that's fraud. Garrison had been building a shadow real estate portfolio with marital funds and hiding it behind a shell company called GW Capital Holdings, which he'd registered with the Secretary of State using the storage unit on Glenwood Avenue as the business address. The storage unit, the one I'd found on the First Citizens bank statement. It wasn't storing clothes or furniture. It was the registered address of his entire hidden empire. My secret ally was a woman named Odessa Chen, a family law attorney in Durham who'd been recommended by Femi, my coworker, the one who'd compared my email system to a serial killer's mind. Femi's cousin had gone through a brutal divorce, and Odessa had gotten her full custody and 70% of the assets. When I called Odessa in October 2020, I told her everything. She listened for 45 minutes without interrupting, which is apparently a thing that good lawyers do and bad husbands don't. Odessa's first instruction: document everything, but touch nothing. Don't move money. Don't confront him again. Don't change your behavior. Let him keep building the case against himself. So I did. For 13 months, I played the role of the beaten-down wife who'd stopped asking questions. I let Garrison think his gaslighting was working. I let Paulette think I was cowed. I let Kendra think she'd won. And every single night, after the kids were asleep and Garrison was either out with Kendra or passed out watching ESPN, I sat at my relocated desk in the garage, right next to the lawnmower, right where he'd put me, and I compiled emails, bank statements, property records, tax filings, phone records that Odessa subpoenaed through a pre-litigation discovery motion I didn't even know was possible, text messages that Garrison thought he'd deleted, but that lived in a cloud backup he'd forgotten he'd enabled in 2017. Everything went into the folder. Everything went into the binder. 312 pages, indexed, tabbed, cross-referenced with source documentation. Halmoni said, "Save the receipt." I saved every single one. Odessa also introduced me to a forensic accountant named Pradeep Malhotra, who spent 3 weeks tracing the money flows through GW Capital Holdings and discovered that Garrison had diverted $287,000 from our joint accounts and his commission checks into the LLC over 22 months. He'd also underreported his income on 2 federal tax returns, which is not a marital issue. That's an IRS issue. Pradeep's exact words when he finished the analysis were, "Your husband is either very arrogant or very stupid. Possibly both. These are not mutually exclusive. The one thing I protected above all else was the kids. Odessa helped me establish a documentation trail for custody, school pickup logs showing I was the primary parent, pediatrician records in my name, emails to Wyatt's teacher about his reading progress, Junie's daycare contact sheet listing me as first contact. Garrison was listed as emergency backup on every form, because he'd never bothered to be anything else. The morning of November 16th, 2022, the day of the hearing, was cool and overcast. I dropped Wyatt off at school and Junie at daycare, drove to the Wake County Courthouse, and parked my Honda Accord in the garage on the second level. I sat in the car for 2 minutes, eating a granola bar and listening to the end of a podcast about Korean cooking. Then I picked up the binder from the passenger seat, walked into the courthouse, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Garrison was already there with Trip Belmont. He was wearing a charcoal suit and a tie I'd bought him for Christmas 3 years ago, which was a nice touch. Perform the devoted husband right until the curtain falls. Paulette was in the gallery, sitting with her ankles crossed and her purse on her lap like she was at church. Kendra was not present, which was smart, because Odessa had made it clear she'd be subpoenaed if she showed her face. Trip opened with the standard play. If Garrison was the primary earner, Garrison was requesting equitable distribution with primary custody. Garrison's position was that I had exhibited controlling and paranoid behavior that created an unstable home environment. Tripp submitted a 2-page statement from Paulette attesting to my obsessive monitoring and emotional volatility. Garrison sat there looking somber and reasonable, like a man who'd been forced into this unfortunate situation by his difficult wife. He even had this small, sad smile, practiced, I'm sure, that said, "I didn't want it to come to this." Then it was our turn. Odessa stood up, straightened her jacket, and said, "Your Honor, we'd like to submit Exhibit A." She placed the binder on the table, 312 pages, blue cover, tabbed, and she began. Tab 1. 4 properties acquired with marital funds, transferred to a single-member LLC without spousal knowledge or consent. Deeds, title searches, LLC registration documents. Tab 2. $287,000 in diverted funds, traced transaction by transaction, with bank statements and canceled checks. Tab 3. 2 years of federal tax returns with underreported income, annotated by a certified forensic accountant. Tab 4. Phone records showing 847 calls and 2,300 text messages to Kendra Voss between September 2020 and October 2022, including messages sent during hours Garrison claimed to be at work functions. Tab 5. Recovered text messages, the deleted ones, from the cloud backup, including one from Garrison to Kendra dated May 7, 2021, the night before Mother's Day, that read, "Almost done with this. Once I get custody, the house is ours. She'll be too broke to fight." That one landed like a grenade in a library. Tab 6. Garrison's own statement to Trip Belmont, obtained through discovery, in which he estimated his annual income at $142,000. Pradeep's analysis showed his actual income, including undisclosed commissions and LLC revenue, was $311,000. Tab 7. Custody documentation. 14 months of school records, medical records, daycare logs, teacher communications, all showing me as the primary and functionally sole caretaker of both children. Trip Belmont requested a recess. The judge denied it. Garrison's face went through a sequence I will remember until the day I die. Confusion first. His eyebrows pulled together, mouth slightly open, like someone had asked him a question in a language he didn't speak. Then recognition, the moment he understood what was in the binder. His jaw tightened. His hands went flat on the table. Then fear. Real fear. The kind that starts in the stomach and climbs. His eyes went to Tripp, who was flipping through our submission with the expression of a man realizing he's brought a butter knife to a sword fight. And then Garrison looked at me. For the first time in maybe 2 years, he actually looked at me. Not through me, not past me, at me. I was sitting with my hands folded, my posture straight, wearing a navy blouse I'd bought at Target for $22. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't give him a single thing to point to and call erratic or volatile or controlling. Paulette in the gallery was gripping her purse so hard her knuckles had gone white. She kept looking at Garrison like she was waiting for him to fix it, to charm his way out, to deploy that big, warm laugh and make it all go away. He couldn't. The judge reviewed the binder for 18 minutes in silence. Then she looked up and said she was granting a temporary restraining order, freezing all assets in GW Capital Holdings, ordering a full forensic audit, and awarding me temporary primary custody of both children pending final proceedings. Garrison started to speak. Tripp put a hand on his arm. Odessa gathered her files. I stood up. And as I walked past Garrison's table, I said 5 words. Quietly, just for him. I saved every receipt. Then I walked out. The collapse was methodical, like dominoes falling in a line that stretched for months. Within 2 weeks, the IRS opened an inquiry into Garrison's unreported income. Pradeep's forensic analysis had been so thorough that the revenue agent told Odessa it was the most organized referral she'd ever received. Garrison owed $74,000 in back taxes, plus penalties, plus interest. His attorney fees to fight it, another $38,000. Within a month, Meridian Partners placed him on administrative leave. Turns out, when your employer discovers you've been using company LLC structures to hide personal real estate acquisitions, they get nervous about their own liability. Barrett, his colleague, and the closest thing Garrison had to a best friend, stopped returning his calls. Sloan unfollowed me on Instagram, which felt less like a loss and more like taking out the trash. Within 6 weeks, Kendra Voss, who I later learned had known Garrison was married from the beginning and had actively helped him research custody strategies, was served with a subpoena as a material witness in our divorce proceedings. Her own employer, a boutique brokerage in North Hills, asked her to resign when the details became semi-public. She did. Last I heard, she'd moved to Asheville, which is a perfectly fine city that did nothing to deserve her. Paulette called me once, in December 2022, 3 weeks after the hearing. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. She said, "Temperance, I think there's been a misunderstanding." I said, "Paulette, there hasn't been a misunderstanding. There's been an accounting. Those are different things." She didn't call again. The final divorce decree was issued in March 2023. I received primary custody of Wyatt and Junie, the house on Millbrook Road, 65% of the marital assets after the hidden properties and diverted funds were factored back in, and $3,200 per month in child support. Garrison was ordered to liquidate the properties held by GW Capital Holdings and split the proceeds. The condo in North Hills sold for $412,000. The duplex near NCSU sold for $289,000. The vacant lot in Apex sold for $187,000. After taxes, penalties, legal fees, and equitable distribution, Garrison netted roughly $119,000 from an empire he'd built to lock me out with. That's what you'd call a negative return on investment. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment on Capitol Boulevard, not far from that taco truck he used to drive to for me. I wonder if he thinks about that. The last time Garrison contacted me directly was in May 2023, almost exactly 2 years after Wyatt brought home that Mother's Day card. He sent a text that said, "I know you won't believe me, but I'm sorry. For all of it. You were always smarter than me. I just didn't want to admit it." I read it sitting on the back porch after the kids were in bed, drinking a glass of $9 Trader Joe's Sauvignon Blanc, which is a perfectly respectable wine, and I will not be taking questions. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another one, deleted that too. Then I put the phone down and looked at the yard. The azaleas Halmoni had planted the year she moved in were blooming, pink and white, absurdly alive. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty. There was just nothing left to say. The receipts had said it all. In June 2023, I used part of my settlement to lease a small commercial space in a strip mall off Six Forks Road. 800 square feet, nothing fancy. I spent the summer renovating it with Huck, who drove up from Fayetteville every weekend, and Lenora, who drove from Charlotte and mostly supervised while eating the food I was testing. I installed a counter with 8 seats. I put up a chalkboard menu. The centerpiece of the menu is Halmoni's Budai Jjigae, the army stew with spam and ramen and gochujang, the dish Garrison turned into a joke at that dinner party. It's $14 a bowl, and it sells out by 1 p.m. every day. The restaurant is called Halmoni's. There's a small framed photo of her by the register, wearing the blue cardigan she wore in every picture, looking at the camera with an expression that says, "I told you so." Wyatt is in 2nd grade now. He reads chapter books and has opinions about dinosaurs that he delivers with the confidence of a tenured professor. Uni is in pre-K and has recently decided that her favorite food is the japchae I make on Sundays. The same dish, the glass noodles, the vegetables, and she eats it with her hands no matter how many times I give her a fork, which is disgusting, and also the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Last Tuesday, I was closing up the restaurant. It was maybe 7 p.m., early October, the sky that specific Raleigh orange that only happens in fall. I was wiping down the counter, and I found a sticky note that must have fallen behind the register. It was from the renovation, Huck's handwriting, and it said, "Tempe's Dream." Finally. I stood there holding it for a while. The restaurant was empty. The kitchen smelled like sesame oil and garlic. Through the window, I could see the parking lot, and beyond it, the road, and beyond that, whatever comes next. Halmoni used to say, "Save the receipt. You will need it later." She was right. About all of it.